Regent Boylan.
Present.
Regent Prager. Here. Regent Brown. Regent Carvalho. Here. Regent Cruz Crawford. Regent Del Carlo.
Here.
Oh, thank you, Regent Cruz Crawford. Regent Del Carlo, yours here. Regent Downs.
Here.
Regent Goodman.
Here.
Regent McMichael.
Here.
Regent Perkins.
Here.
Regent Tarkanian.
Here.
You have a quorum present.
Thank you, Carrie. We'll move right into public comment. For those who would like to call in and offer public comment, please dial 669-444-9171 and enter meeting ID 928-4944-5069 and passcode 555555. Is there any public comment at GBC?
There's no public comment at GBC.
Thank you. Is there any public comment at the system office in Reno?
There is.
Good afternoon. Kent Irvin, past president, Nevada Faculty Alliance, KNTERVIN. Today's presentation on governance is totally lacking in the role of faculty. So I would like to give an explanation of academic freedom and shared governance. Academic freedom is the freedom for faculty to teach, to determine curriculum and academic standards, to explore all avenues of scholarship, research, and creative expression, and to disseminate the results, and to speak and write on matters of public concern and on any matter related to professional duties and the functioning of governance of the academic institution. Instructors are entitled to academic freedom in the classroom. That does not mean totally free rein to discuss material with no relation to the subject, but teachers must be free to discuss controversial materials without political control and without fear of retribution or censorship. Controversy is at the heart of free academic inquiry. College and university faculty are citizens, members of a learned profession, and officers of an educational institution. When they speak or write as citizens on matters of public concern, they must be free from institutional censorship or discipline. Shared governance is part of academic freedom for faculty collectively. Faculty have primary responsibility for curriculum, subject matter and methods of instruction, research, faculty status, and the aspects of student life that are related to educational processes. The responsibility for faculty status includes appointments, promotions, the granting of tenure and dismissal. Due process, including the input of faculty review committees, is essential. The Board of Regents need to incorporate the principles of shared governance into its own rules of governance and in holding presidents accountable for their campus operations. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Jim New, NEW, president of NFA. The American system of higher education became the world's gold standard by embracing the tenets of academic freedom and shared governance. The Nevada Faculty Alliance is dedicated to enhancing the promise of higher education for the common good, built upon these same principles. In that spirit, we feel obligated to strenuously and publicly object to the planned presentation by Dr. Jenna A. Robinson. As president of the James G. Martin Center for the Academic Renewal, Dr. Robinson presides over an organization that is antithetical to those core principles. Despite assurances that Dr. Robinson's presentation has been vetted with, quote, no slides pertaining to political ideology or anti-faculty chaos, unquote, the organization has existed for several years under various names with one objective: to empower partisans in government by restricting the rights of faculty. Giving her a platform implicitly validates her organization's work and its ideological approach to renew higher education. While we applaud the Regents for exploring methods to more effectively administer NSHE, We feel a representative from such an overtly ideological and activist organization is inappropriate. This will only serve to further erode the faculty's confidence in this board's ability to effectively and transparently govern NSHE for the greater good. We strongly urge you to postpone this workshop until a suitable presenter from a nonpartisan organization can be found. Thank you.
Hello, esteemed NSHE board members and others. My name is Tanya Hayes, Hayes. I'm an economics professor at TMCC. My colleague Jim New already spoke eloquently, and I thank him for putting everything into such great words. I just wanted to say that, like many of my colleagues, I'm concerned with an ideological organization with an open agenda that seems to be in opposition of our academic values, being invited to advise our Board of Regents on best practices for governance. Who on the board invited this organization and why? I'm sure a lot of us would like to know for future re-election purposes. Thank you.
I don't see any additional public comment at the system office in Reno. We'll move to public comments here in Las Vegas.
Doug Unger, DOUG, UNGER, President, UNLV Chapter, Nevada Faculty Alliance. With respect and Las Vegas greetings to Jenna Robinson before her appearance before the Regents, I must report that faculty are more than concerned about her organization, the James G. Martin Center for Academic Renewal, which has a reputation for ideologically motivated advocacy that has undermined academic freedom, standards for faculty tenure and promotion, and progressive curricula focused on issues of race, ethnicity, and inclusion. The group is in part responsible for pushing legislatures and boards to impose draconian policies that have seriously diminished faculty rights and governance in the Florida and Texas higher education systems, as well as in North Carolina and Georgia, causing faculty and student flight from those states and earning them sharply critical statements from the American Association of University Professors. In sum, most faculty view Ms. Robinson's groups and their workshops as akin to big oil companies addressing the climate crisis, or big pharma, the pricing issues for prescription drugs. Though in the PowerPoint attached to the board agenda, we see little that indicates an ideological attack on higher education in Nevada, we caution that anything this group advocates for should be taken with more than a grain of salt, as they say. Ask and consider which donors and contributors are funding this group and what might be their ideological biases. Listen to what will apparently be strong positions about board organization and power, but at the same time, stay tuned to possible echoes and reverberations, however faint, of the growing, baleful drumbeats of authoritarianism at the expense of democracy. Thank you.
Pete Martini, M-A-R-T-I-N-I. I'm NFA chapter president at Nevada State and a Nevada State faculty member. When I was younger, I don't know if I've ever been young, but when I was younger, my mother used to say to me, be careful who your friends are, because sometimes the only thing people know about you is who you choose to stand next to. Today, NSHE is choosing to stand next to the James G. Martin Center. That is problematic. This is an organization that has a hostile view towards DEI, a draconian view towards DEI, and I would like to remind the board that we have one of the most diverse student bodies in the nation. What are those students to think about who we choose to stand next to today? What are they supposed to think about what faculty and staff and administrators and the Board of Regents choose to value based on who we want guiding us on issues of governance? The Board of Regents and NSHE has many friends we could have turned to if we wanted information on good governance. This is not the friend to have. I'm going to quote for you, in their own words, from their model general education program. the James G. Martin organization, put out a model gen ed program. And in it, they say, and I quote, "Some bodies of knowledge, particularly those that comprise the Western tradition, offer superior insight to the workings of nature, humanity, and others." As a PhD trained psychologist, I can tell you that's malarkey. It is absolutely insane. We should not be standing next to these people. We should not countenance them when it comes to advising us on good governance. They should not be here. This is not the friend for us. Thank you.
Is that all for public comment in Las Vegas? No?
Hi, for the record, my name is Amy Avaluna. I'm the Director of Culture, Planning, and Policy at Nevada State University. I'm also a graduate of UNLV and CSN and grateful to be here today. Two of my children, gender diverse children, actually are students at Nevada State. And so I thank you for the work that you do to serve them. I just wanted to come forward and bring a tool that was provided to some of us. I myself am an administrative faculty member, and it was created by our wonderful Department of Equity and Diversity at Nevada State. So what they provided us with were questions for consideration, and I thought that you should be provided the same so that you can critically analyze the content that will be provided to you. Oh, I'm so shaky. Breathe for a second. Questions for consideration as you listen to the presentation are, given the outcomes the James G. Martin Center has pursued in other states, how do their values and mission misalign with NSHE's commitments to equity statewide? Since the Nevada system of higher education is a minority-serving higher education system, how would the largely diverse student populations that you serve benefit from efforts that seek to eliminate initiatives that promote their recruitment, retention, and graduation? And finally, what impact will your affiliation with the Martin Center have on board policies and recommendations across the Nevada institutions? Thank you for critically evaluating the content that'll be provided to you today.
Good afternoon. My name is Kevin Osorio Hernandez. For the record, KVINOSO-RIO-HERNANDEZ. I am the proud student body president to lead our students at Nevada State University. And I'm also the vice chair of the Nevada Student Alliance. I will say, as a student, as a citizen, as a constituent of yours, I feel as though that having these missions in regards to bringing on outside entities that do not align with the diversity of our students in our state is really concerning to me. As a Latino, as a first-generation American, as a student, and as a son from immigrants from Guatemala, it is one of the most, I think, concerning parts that one of the parts that I continuously think about is, as a history major, I'm learning about the historical erasure across the nation, across different parts of different countries. And I start to think about, I don't want the state of Nevada to succumb to the areas like Texas and Florida, North Carolina. I think our diverse students need a better opportunity for access. They need a better vision for what it is where they can see themselves in the state of Nevada. And having organizations like these attend and try to, tell you all how to govern, I don't think is appropriate. And as a student, this is especially concerning. And I represent all the students from Nevada State University and across the state as well. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no additional comments, we'll move into, I'm sorry, hang on just one second.
Okay.
Oh, you know what, go ahead.
I do.
Regent Goodman. Mr. Chair, we have
I-
one caller. I know that we've got to get to SES, so would it be appropriate to go to the board here for their public comment, and then we'll go right into SES?
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Thank
Regent
you.
Goodman.
I feel like this is the place to make comment on this because all of your concerns, I appreciate and understand, but they don't really have to do with the actual policy presentation. I feel like we all need to listen more. I realize this is a very conservative group, but this is a informational presentation on policy in a workshop. There is no vote here. Each of our board members is going to take with them what is valuable and leave behind what isn't. And there's something to be said about taking a moment and listening, even if it is something that we don't agree with, even if there are things that they have done that we don't agree with. This is what higher education is all about, is listening to opposing views. The reason I'm talking about this here is just in direct response to your comments. I don't feel like this presentation is even remotely political. If anything, it's benign. I wanted to ask all of you, if there's a place where we want to rally together and get behind something, it's getting behind fighting Senate Joint Resolution 7 that is coming up. That is something where you will feel in your classrooms the effect of politicization and the effect of having a legislature essentially take away your academic freedom. I appreciate all that you do, and I appreciate that you have that freedom. This is an informational item, but we have something very big coming up in November of 2024. If that is voted in, there will be...
Pardon me, that particular resolution has not been noticed or agendized for discussion. So
I know I'm in
discussing-
public comment though, right?
Well, in this situation, the region, you need
Then
to
I
be
won't-
careful.
Okay.
Just be careful about that particular item
Thank you.
because you're
I
getting into.
appreciate that. Okay,
thank you.
so thank you so much, sir. I would just ask that there are things coming up in our future that if we want to come together as a group, we need to do that together as a group. And so those are where the real risks are. So I'd like to say that. And in full transparency, I'd also like to say that I'm working with the Chancellor's office to do a climate study of academic freedom and freedom of speech on campuses, because Dr. Irvin listed what academic freedom means for professors, but I'm not sure that that is extending sometimes to our students where they have the ability to say what they feel. And so we will be doing a climate survey that will be an anonymous survey on all campuses so that we can really get an idea. And whatever the results from that are, I hope that we can all work together moving forward. I think we all want what's best for our system. And so I just wanted to let you know that it's back to my initial comment. It's always great to listen.
Regent Del Carlo.
Thank you, Chair Brooks. And I'm concerned that we in NSHE belong to two national, highly thought of organizations. One is the Association of Community College Trustees, and the other one is the Association of Governing Boards. We are members of both, pay the dues, attend their conferences, and both of them are the gold standard in our industry of higher education. I see some of you nodding your head, I agree. And I would like to know why we're not having them, we're members. Why aren't they coming in? I too am disturbed by the, and who picked this group to come in? I'd like to know who picked this group because I just don't think it's appropriate. Thank you.
Michael. Competence of President Robinson or the James G. Martin Center of Academic Renewal have not been agendized for discussion, and they have not given a waiver that would allow us to discuss their character or competence as a board, allow the board to make that discussion. So I would just caution the board in your deliberations, in your discussions, that you keep that in mind, that we need to be cautious and not identify them because they've not been noticed and they've not given a waiver.
Okay, but I want to know why we don't use AGB and ACCT. We're members of both of those groups. And I know every regent sitting here has been to one or other or both of those conferences.
Is there any public comment from SES? Is there?
One caller.
Don't I get an answer to my question? I'm asking you, Chair Brooks.
You know,
You set the agenda.
Regent, here's what I was trying to take a look at, is what other public comment do we have? Because it sounds like this is a discussion that you would like to have. That certainly could have been had and addressed prior to this moment in time, because the agenda was posted and you certainly had time to raise any concern, to find out any clarifying points in terms of how we were assembled today for the workshop. And so I think it's important that if we have somebody that is part of public comment, that I address that first. And then if there's conversation that can take place to answer your questions, then we can do that.
Okay, fine, public comment, and then I would like an answer to my question. Thank you.
Is there public comment through SES?
Yes, there is, Chair.
Okay.
Caller,
Public comment.
please state your name and spell it for the record, and then you have 2 minutes to address the board. Thank you.
My name is Lars Jensen. I'm work at TMCC. The conservative Martin Center grew out of the conservative John Locke Foundation. Ms. Robinson joined the Martin Center from the John Locke Foundation. She has ties to the conservative Koch Foundation, which is a donor. These 3 entities are entities which don't trust public education and appear to want to dismantle it. Instead of leaving education to the experts, they want to impose their conservative ideology on what's taught and how. Members of the board, please allow me to give you 3 examples from the Martin Center's website presided over by Ms. Robinson. First statement, faculty are allowed excessive latitude in what they teach and often get away with teaching little at all. Underlying this statement is that teachers are lazy or that they don't know what they're doing. There are issues in any profession, but this is an insult to a whole profession. If there are issues with the quality of teaching in places, they are far more likely to be related to the low pay that teachers are afforded and the compromises made because of that. Second statement, Florida's reform are reasonable and moderate. Members of the board, I ask you, where's the reason for relegating the study of the experiences of Black people to a prohibited category? Or is there a reason for canceling? Where's the reason for canceling students' access to accurate, truthful information about history of their country? Don't the students deserve to be taught the truth? I think so. Educators in Florida can get fired for teaching the historical truth. Third statements by Ms. Robinson herself on global warming. Despite the assertion that there's scientific consensus on the need for drastic and immediate action, the truth is that there's no such consensus. That's her words. This is simply false. Consensus among scientists on global warming existed in 2007 and it exists today. Her mention in the article of a counterexample of a scientist who questions the origin of global warming does not prove anything. This amounts to manipulation of the scientific opinion. Ms. Robinson's statement in the article makes her look like a climate denier.
Sir, I
Please take
apologize,
anything
but
she
your
says with
time
a
for public comments has expired. We thank you, but
Please take
unfortunately, your
anything
time
she
has.
says with a grain of salt. That's all I have to say.
Thank you for your comments. Councilman Martinez, prior to bringing this item forward so that we can get started with the workshop, where would be the appropriate time to address any questions that were directly posed to me during a public comment by Regents, so that we can get moving? So just to be clear, prior to introducing the doctor, then I could address the questions that were posed. Thank you. Regent Cruz Crawford.
Thank you, Chair. Regent Cruz Crawford, for the record. I would like to just share my concerns with the selection of the workshop today. One of my concerns is a lot of the divisive anti-DEI initiatives and articles put out.
Again, I
by
apologize,
Demar-
Regent Cruz Crawford. We need to be careful because we're bridging into an area where we're discussing the character and qualifications of the entity, and that's not been agendized.
Okay. So what I would like to just share is that I would really like us to work on collectively bringing us together and working on those initiatives and continuing to be improving ourselves with diversifying our lenses in a positive and healthy way. And I have a hard time putting this into words now after Mr. Wixom, but I just want to let you know I do not agree with that today. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Regent Boylan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Wixom, this has got nothing to do with the entity that's presenting before us. This has to do with NSHE and the board. I'd like to know who chose this entity and how much we are paying them. So somehow, after Ms. Regent Del Carlo's question, which I think was a great one, I'd like to get the answers to that. How much are we paying them? Did I bring them into the conversation, Mr. Wixom? But the entity. All right. I'd like that answer, Mr. Chair. It's useless asking you when the agenda has been made to give us any answers or to change anything, because you never do. So most of us regents who don't question you or question
The chair has
That's so uncalled for.
been
I gotta tell you.
agendized,
Huh?
and that's an improper.
That's so uncalled
improper.
for.
That's an improper slight. at
That's
this point in time.
improper?
That's improper. The
Okay.
chair can answer your questions, but you can't address the character or competence of the chair at this time.
Oh, no, nothing to do with this character. That was just, okay, I apologize
Yeah.
then, but I'd like my question about how much is being paid and who decided that. Is
Thank
that
you.
right, Mr. Wixom?
That's a great question. Thanks a lot, Regent Boylan. I certainly don't mind
Thank you,
answering
Chair.
your question and the question of other regents regarding this item. I do actually, I do have a differencing of opinion in terms of how communication is conducted on the board in terms of decorum. And I will say that I'm not sure what the purpose of disruption is or asking questions in a manner that could seem hostile or aggressive. I don't know what we get out of that, but nonetheless, the cost of today's workshop being delivered by Dr. Robinson is zero. There is no cost for this. I hope that satisfies your answer, your question. The way that
Thank you,
this was
Mr. Chair.
put together, while we
thank
could
you.
have certainly had conversation under the guise of civil discourse prior to this meeting happening right now, is that this was done in conjunction with me as the chair in looking for an alternative source of support in providing guidance to the board, specifically with the differences of management and governance. Because from my perspective, we could use some support. Collectively as a board, we could use some support. While there are other organizations that certainly we could have asked, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about this in terms of something perhaps different, because what we have had seems to not stick, just my perception. And so I thought, because we keep sliding into different areas, and it's always great when we have opportunities for additional education or re-education to welcome it. There are plenty of places where I have been where the information that's being provided to me, I might not agree with all of it. Perhaps there's one or two things I can take out and apply. And maybe that's the situation here, where we don't have to agree with all of it. We could take what we feel as individuals as possibly a good practice measure and apply it to the things that we have to do collectively as a board. That's why, that's why this group, and I think what you would find is, even in the reference materials that this group has provided us, they mentioned the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, the Association of Governing Boards, Pedia Times, there are resources that they're providing that we should be very familiar with. And when we talk about inclusion, which seems to be a platform across the board of NSHE, when we talk about inclusion, are we only talking about the like-mindedness of a voice that we want to hear? Or are we talking about inclusion in recognition that we may hear something that we don't agree with? But part of that inclusion is allowing that voice to be heard. I'm not sure what else I can say. I'm a little bit surprised, I'll tell you, by the passion that folks have displayed regarding an agenda item that is geared for board education. Because I have heard from a personal, just from a personal standpoint, I've actually heard more today about this piece of information to help the board with governance than I have about anything that is currently going on in the Middle East. I just have. So with that, unless there's another regent that wants to make a comment, Regent Perkins?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's quite hard to make comments since there's a delay in the from what I'm hearing and when I can respond. So thank you for this. I would have to agree with Regent DiCarlo. There are trusted sources that have been around. How old is ACCT, Carol? I mean, AGB has been around a lot longer than the individuals that you have asked to do this workshop. To take that into consideration for the expertise that AGB, ACCT have, it seems disingenuous. And this group, although they may have a great presentation, I don't feel that we should be aligning ourselves with a group that puts out information that is directly in conflict with what we deem as what we post on our website about being inclusive and belonging. How does this make the students feel when this group is coming to talk with us? Does this include the students to make them have a sense of belonging? So I do agree with what my colleagues have said and what a lot of the public comments were.
Regent Perkins, again, that's a discussion of the character and competence of this organization, and it's not in accordance with the open meeting law.
That's fantastic. I was just saying about the 3 years versus 30. So thank you.
Are there any other, before we move on to this agenda item, are there any more questions or comments? Go ahead, Regent Carvalho.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm at a loss for words in so many ways here. First, with all due respect to Regent Goodman, I think that we have all listened, and I think that's why there's so much discussion about this today. Listened in terms of reading and finding the background information about this organization. This was not my decision. I'm very uncomfortable with this organization presenting to us today. I hear what you say, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Wixom. With that said, I would respectfully ask if we can perhaps chair or table this item or pull it and reevaluate who we are able to bring forward that is appropriate to give this information. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Carvalho. I see this a little bit differently, and I'll tell you why. I'm not here to gauge the perception that and the opinion that you may have that whether this is an appropriate or inappropriate body, considering that the only information that we are being provided with today are the differences between management and governance of a governing board. So I'm just, again, surprised that while the opportunity to hear something that has to do with how we govern, whether you agree with 100% of it or 50% of it, you can take whatever you want and throw everything else away. Is there any other? Regent Boylan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question is for Mr. Wixom. Mr. Wixom, I see you're on the top of your game, but the chair just mentioned the Middle East. That is not an agendized item, and why is he discussing it and you did not correct him? So I'd like you to stay really on top of the game. Thank you, sir.
I'm going to move on to agenda item number 2 and introduce Dr. Jenna Robinson, who's the president of the James G. Martin Center for Academic Renewal. She's going to lead us in a discussion on the principles and best practices of highly effective governing boards in higher education. Dr. Robinson, there we go. I appreciate you being here with us today to provide us some guidance in terms of the differences between management and governance. And I hope that collectively we're able to gain some insight and best practice measures to enable us to move forward in a positive manner to support the system of higher education and, more importantly, the students that we have on our campus where some of our policy is being derived for. Thank you.
Thank you. I am going to wait just a minute to start my presentation. I know you're probably going to do a share screen there from your office, and I know it's going to rearrange all my screens. So go ahead and do that share screen, and then I'll get started.
Thank you. We can actually see at our end the slide that you have
can
up.
see it. Okay. And all the people who are attending via Zoom can see it as well?
I'm going to assume
No,
that
we cannot.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well then I'm gonna just go ahead and get started then. Thank you for inviting me to speak today, Chair Brooks. I'm happy to speak to all of you about effective practices for university governance. Unfortunately, I do have a hard stop at 4:45 my time, which is 12:45 your time. Is that right? Am I an hour off? Anyways, in about an hour and 5 minutes from now. As Chair Brooks said, I'm Jenna Robinson, president of the James G. Martin Center for Academic Renewal, where I worked since 2007. I am also a member of the Board of Visitors of my alma mater, UNC Chapel Hill, where I got my master's degree and PhD in political science. I am a current board member of the Alumni Free Speech Alliance and a former member of the North Carolina Advisory Committee for the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. Next slide. The Martin Center is a nonprofit organization dedicated to higher education reform. We advocate responsible governance, viewpoint diversity, academic quality, cost-effective education solutions, and innovative market-based reform. And we do that by studying and reporting on critical issues in higher education and recommending policies that can create change, especially at the state and board level. We are located in Raleigh, North Carolina, and have a special focus on our home state. That said, we work with state legislators, board members, university administrators, and faculty around the country to identify and implement policy changes. And I love working with engaged board members, and I have a passion for policy. And what I hope to do today is recommend some best practices and ideas so this board can be as effective as possible. What I've observed over and over is that when board members work to get the strategies and policies right, everything else can run like clockwork, or as close to clockwork as anything can ever be in an environment as changeable as higher education. Getting the policies right means that you can be amazingly productive with the limited time you have, because like most boards, you are a volunteer board, you're a part-time board, and so you have to use your time very, very effectively. And if you do that, it'll be good for you as a governing body, good for the system, and good for the individual institutions that you govern. You can see a list of the places that we have worked. We've worked with the UNC System, Board of Governors, the Chapel Hill Board of Trustees, several other universities and states, including North Carolina, Florida, West Virginia, and South Dakota. Next slide. I am trying to go a little bit fast so we can save some time for Q&A. If I'm going too fast, please let me know and I will slow down. So when thinking about board governance, it's best, I think, to start at the beginning. What is the board's charge? Where does the board get its authority? What are the laws and bylaws by which it is governed? What is it instructed to do and how does it do it? So briefly, we'll look at the Nevada Constitution, statutes, and bylaws that you are governed by. So I'll start with the Constitution. Article 11, Section 4 says that the establishment of a state university controlled by the Board of Regents. The legislature shall provide for the establishment of a state university which shall embrace departments of agriculture, mechanic arts, and mining to be controlled by a Board of Regents whose duties shall be prescribed by law. And then in Article 11, Section 7, the legislature shall at its regular session, next preceding the expiration of the term, define the duties of that Board of Regents. I've recently heard by a move by legislators to remove the Board of Regents from the Constitution, possibly so it can change the way you're elected or appointed, which of course would be a significant change. But right now, because this board is mentioned in the Constitution, it makes you directly responsible to your constituents. If this board were appointed by the legislature or the governor, which is common in other states, it would become directly responsible to those parties instead of voters. I probably don't need to tell you that that would be a significant change, but it would be very in line with many other boards. Very few states have elected university boards. Across most states, gubernatorial appointment is most common. And if you want to see more about that, you can go to the National Conference of State Legislatures or the Education Commission of the states to see how boards are laid out across the country. The Board of Regents is also mentioned in Nevada law. In NRS 396, you get the rules of the board. The Board of Regents may prescribe rules for its own government, the government of the system. And this is key because it establishes that this board is a self-governing entity and makes the board's bylaws and getting those bylaws right of paramount importance. It's mentioned again in Statute 396.380, which gives the Board of Regents control of expenditures. The members of the Board of Regents are the sole trustees to receive and disperse all money of the system for the purposes provided in Statute 396.370, which mostly talks about how the funds come from a grant of land. And the only thing it says about the purpose is that that money is for the establishment and maintenance of a university. This law also specifies that the board shall control the expenditures of all money appropriated for the support and maintenance of the system and all the money received from any other source. So that is a significant source of your fiduciary responsibility to the state of Nevada. There are other statutes, that instruct you to report to the governor or the legislature, to delegate to administration, to carry out particular policies adopted by the legislature. But these two that I've mentioned here are some of the most important. I also know that the legislature has made two recent changes to the board structure, changing the length of terms from 6 years to 4 years and shrinking the board size from 13 to 19. These two changes will present challenges, and I'll talk more about those later on, but I did want to mention it here when I was talking about Nevada statutes. Next, I want to talk a little about the bylaws. Your bylaws in Title I are the main document laying out the authority, duties, and operations of this board. It is the most important document regarding your governance structure and practices, and it is something that you as a self-governing body have the ability to modify as necessary. In Section 3, it lays out the functions It's providing programs of instruction at the undergraduate and graduate levels, sponsoring and undertaking programs of basic and applied research, which complement the programs of instruction and which contribute to the fullest realization of the state's potential, and sponsoring and conducting continuing programs of public service for the citizens of the state. It also instructs you to cooperate with state agencies in order to do two very important things: to serve the people and ensure the maximum utilization of the state's resources. However, this is not the only place in university policies where board authority is mentioned. There are a few other provisions regarding the board's functions in the university policies that are worth reviewing. Next slide. And in case I haven't been saying next slide often enough, we should be on the slide that says Board Authority and Duties, Title II Code. So there are more details in Title II of the system policies. 1.2.3, the function of the board, which specifically lays out that the board's primary function is policy setting. The Board of Regents is a corporate body legally responsible for the University of Nevada. Its function is to control and manage the Nevada system of higher education, primarily by setting policy. Upon approval by the Board of Regents, the appropriate officers of the system shall implement such policies. And so right there, you get laid out what Chair Brooks was talking about, the difference between really legislating and managing, or strategy versus operations, laid out right there in your bylaws. And then 1.2.4, the board's authority and delegation of authority. The Board of Regents retains the right at all times to lawfully delegate. So the two takeaways from this section are: one, that the board's primary function is to set policies, and two, that the board has the right to delegate. And I would go so far as to say that the board should delegate. A board that doesn't delegate is not going to have the time to get through the number of important things that it has to do. Smart policy setting and delegation go hand in hand. If you make clear and thorough rules, administrative activity can go forward without your direct involvement, but still 100% in keeping with your intentions and priorities. And I think that should be the goal. You want an institution that can run without you having to weigh in every day and field text messages, 24 hours a day. You want it to be able to run smoothly on the path that you have created. Next slide. So Title IV underlines the points made in Title II. Number 2, this Board of Regents adopts the policy that the function of a Board of Regents is advisory and legislative. Thus, the Board of Regents shall delegate, whenever possible, duties which are initiatory and executive. Number 3, it shall be the function of the Board of Regents to approve or reject policies proposed by the administration. And 5, only in the most unusual circumstances should the Board of Regents concern itself with the details of administration. Specifically, this is an affirmation by the Board of Regents itself that its purpose is legislative, i.e. policymaking, and that it should delegate administrative actions to the chancellor, presidents, or other staff. Next slide. The next thing I want to look at is just one portion of the mission statement. I'm focusing here on that just one part because it is the clearest articulation I could find of the board's oversight duties. Because policy setting, although that is the number one, oversight is also an important duty. An important duty of the Nevada Board of Regents. Of course, there are other mentions of oversight throughout the Nevada statutes and policy documents, but those are all about particular oversight functions rather than the overall charge of oversight for the system. So that's why I'm focusing on this part of the mission statement. The policy says the regents govern the system according to the following objectives. B, to ensure that all activities demonstrate a continued quest for excellence, economy, and the balancing of basic goals that the public interest requires. And those two words, to ensure, are doing a lot of work. They mean that you're providing oversight for the system's mission and functions. Next, I'm going to talk about the board's practices. And given the duties and responsibilities we just outlined, what do you and what should you spend your time working on? So here's what I hope is a helpful way to think about the board's various functions. The Nevada System of Higher Education is a self-governing entity. As such, it has all of the same parts of government that the US government or the state government does, just in miniature. And so you can think about it with three branches. The board's primary function is legislative and strategic, but it has elements of all of those three branches. Unlike the federal government, there isn't always a clear separation of powers. Your bylaws and constitution are not laid out quite like that. But it is a board priority to focus on policies first, as laid out in those bylaws. So, as I said, first and foremost, you're a legislative body, which means you're focusing on policies. So I think 60% of the time that you spend should be focused on setting policy, establishing the process for application and delegation, and determining the criteria for oversight. About 30% of your time should be spent doing judicial activities, which means oversight and accountability. So hearing reports and reviews, doing performance management, doing self-evaluations and making sure that you are transparent. Specifically in your bylaws, it says that there are disciplinary activities that are within your purview. And so all of that is kind of the judicial function of the board. And last, the executive function. The board does have a small executive function, but most of it should be delegated. And that's, administering the rules and regulations that you have set, and no more than 10% of your time. That means carrying out legislative mandates, carrying out university policies, and following the bylaws. And your goal should be to spend as little time as possible on day-to-day operations and as much time as possible on first, strategy, and two, effective oversight. None of that is to say that you should not be engaged. You should absolutely be engaged. But boards should direct their time and energy to legislative functions first and foremost. So think of yourself as more like Congress than like the president or the bureaucracy, right? You're not the FDA, you're not the EPA, you're Congress. But hopefully, of course, is to be more productive than our current Congress. Next slide. So let's work through an example using academic program review to examine the different types of duties and responsibilities of the board. Academic program review is something you probably engage in regularly, but just as a reminder, it is a process of evaluating the status, effectiveness, and progress of academic programs and helps identify the future direction, needs, and priorities of those programs, i.e., do we need new departments, programs, or majors? Should we discontinue any departments, programs, or majors? Should we consolidate them? Throughout the process of academic program review, the board will wear several hats. So the first and most important part of academic program review is to decide exactly how you're going to do it. How often will you review academic programs? What will be the criteria by which you review academic programs? Maybe the criteria are that you want to know how many students are served, how many majors are produced, how many student credit hours are taught, what percentage of those student credit hours are to undergraduate students versus graduate students. What various degrees do they contribute to? Are they part of general education? Are they part of the mission of the university in terms of the content that it teaches? All of those criteria go into, how are we going to evaluate academic programs? And then you have to decide, well, who will carry this out? And so all of that is in the legislative policy setting part of academic program review. The next thing you do is you have to carry out the review, and most of that will be done on campuses because you will have told them these are the criteria that we need. So they will amass that information for you and bring it to you. And then the only thing that's left for you to do is to make the decision. You will look at an individual program and say, this program checks all of the boxes for the criteria that we set. So this program will grow or continue to exist, or will become a new program at our university or our college or our system. And then instruct administration to carry it out. And so throughout the process, you've worn several hats, but the goal is if you set those criteria and timelines and authorities right when you're doing the policy setting process, actually carrying out program review will run very smoothly and in a very predictable kind of way. And during this process, or really any process that the board engages in, there's a significant delegation of all the various functions. So when you're doing policy making, the entity to which you're going to delegate is the system staff. The system staff have the information that they need in order to help propose those policies for you to tweak and for you to vote on. In the oversight capacity, as I said, the system staff, the university staff will collect all of the data you need in order to make a decision. And executive, the chancellor, the presidents, and the upper level administration will actually carry out the decisions that you make. So if you decide through academic program review that you need a new foreign language course, for example, it is the chancellor, presidents, and upper level administrators who will decide, exactly how are they going to put that program together and launch that program on your campus or in your system. Excuse me. So deciding what to delegate and to whom to delegate is a significant part of governance, a significant part of what you're doing. And delegation allows the board to be strategic rather than operational. It allows you to manage your time wisely and to make sure that you're fulfilling that strategic and oversight function rather than getting lost in day-to-day activities. And a very important part of that is choosing the chancellor, presidents, and upper level administrators. Those are some of the most important decisions that you will make. Personnel is policy. So getting the right people in these roles allows you to delegate with confidence to know that the policies that you are setting will be carried out in the ways that you envision. So as you think about your charge as laid out in the Constitution, the statutes, and the bylaws, as well as think about how you can best stay strategic and policy-oriented and how you can best exercise and delegate your authority, here are some questions to consider. First, how much authority should be delegated to individual university presidents and staff? And is it laid out in the bylaws the way it should be? Should the delegation be uniform across all of the colleges and universities in the system? How much can the chancellor and presidents delegate once you have delegated authority to them? Can they further delegate it to their own designees? And then as the board, think about for your own selves is how are we spending our time and how are we evaluating our performance? If you get your policies right and you delegate efficiently, it will enable you to be confident in your decision making and to get more done overall. Okay. Next slide. Okay, so now I'd like to work through another example. At this time, as an example of a generic board meeting that ends up either taking more time than you planned or ends up being impossible to make a decision because members are focusing on operations instead of policies. Maybe it's about the salary for a particular position, or maybe it's about budgeting for some small item that people feel really strongly about. Whatever it is may end up irresolvable because the board can't agree, or it may come to a contentious vote that upsets the board's cohesion. Either way, you end up taking up the board's time and energy without a satisfactory outcome. And every board finds itself in this situation from time to time. But if it's a regular occurrence, there could be some possible causes having to do with the structure or the policies that could be fairly easily addressed to make sure that it does not continue to happen. So one could be that the board has not established clear criteria for decision making. For example, with that academic program review, if you haven't set out how you will evaluate a program, whether you're focusing on student credit hours, the number of majors, or whether there's student demand for something, then you will get caught up every time you're trying to decide about a new program. You'll have to rehash that discussion. So it's best to set the criteria in advance. It could be that the board hasn't delegated enough authority to the administration, and therefore is trying to make too many small decisions. It could be that the board lacks the appropriate committee structure to address the issue. I'm going to talk about committees in just a moment, but if you don't have a dedicated committee for particular items, then it's gonna end up in full board with not enough time dedicated to it. And lastly, it could be that the board fails to put routine decisions on the consent agenda, which again is going to make your full board meeting just too full. So some of the solutions that I suggest are first to review and approve policy regularly so that you can confidently delegate. So make sure those policies say everything you want them to say. The second is to align the committee structure with the university needs. And I'm going to make a couple of recommendations in just a few moments about what committee structures I think would be most effective. I think you should also assign most substantive discussions to those individual committees, because the people who have chosen to be, say, on the academic committee or the finance committee or the investments committee are the people who have the most expertise in those areas. And so you really can get more bang for your buck by doing discussion in committee. And lastly, you can institute a practice of putting all items that have been approved in committee on a consent agenda unless a board member specifically requests that item to be removed, so that things can become more routine in your voting process. Next slide. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is the board structure. And the first thing I'll say is that you all are doing a ton of work because your board is smaller than average and has more work than average. So the workload that I know you must be getting through is immense. Nevada is only one of 8 states to have a single statewide governing board that governs both 2- and 4-year public institutions with the same board. 20 states have single statewide coordinating boards, and the remaining states have one or more major system-wide coordinating or governing boards and or a statewide administrative service agency. And in many states with a single governing board, like you have in Nevada, individual institutions governed by the system board have their own individual boards. And that is not so in Nevada. So Nevada's governance structure is more centralized than most other states, which really puts a lot on your plate as a board to get through at every meeting. In 2016, the average public university board had 12 members, while the average private university board had 29 members. And that's for individual institutions. That's not for systems. As a comparison, I'll tell you about North Carolina, which is where I live. There are 24 members on the UNC System Board of Governors and 11 members on the board for each individual institution within the UNC system. There is a separate board for the North Carolina Community College System, which has 21 members, and each individual community college board has a 12-member board of trustees. So in total, there are more than 900 people involved in the governance and colleges and universities in North Carolina. Now, North Carolina is a bigger state than Nevada, but that is a huge difference in the number of people involved in governance. And so that I think it makes it especially important that your board has its structures and its practices and processes just really, really well outlined, because you have a ton of work to do. North Carolina is obviously an extreme example. Most states don't have that many people involved in governance. But I think it does give you an idea, as I said, of how much you all are doing as individuals compared to board members in other states. So next, I want to talk about the structure of the board, the internal best practices. To the person who is advancing the slides, thank you for following along, even though I keep forgetting to say next slide. So the size of the boards. Boards need to be a workable size. There isn't a magic number, but fewer than 15 is a good rule of thumb. Obviously, you all are right there. But when your board does decrease in size, I think it will be an additional challenge. I'll talk first about the downside of large boards, but obviously you don't have that problem. Too often, larger numbers of trustees means that the whole board ceases to be involved in policy decisions. You just can't involve that many people. People start checking out. But on the other hand, you want to have enough members to be able to do meaningful committee work, right? You have to be able to put enough people on each committee. So 9 is a very small board. The small size will mean that each member will have to serve on more committees and probably increase their time commitment. But it also makes good delegation absolutely crucial. Term length. Trustees need terms long enough to be experienced and knowledgeable. They need enough time first to learn and then to lead. Ideally, trustee terms will be at least 6 or 7 years in length, with the option of 2 terms so that there can be a balance between experience and new viewpoints. And of course, terms should be staggered. You want some members to have that institutional memory so that when you take up a policy question and you think about, why did we set up the policy the way it is? Someone on the board will be able to say, hey, I remember that discussion and I know why the policy is the way it is now and, and why we're revisiting it. You also want to have regular, frequent meetings. I would say at least 6 per year. Given the financial and academic challenges of higher education, I think it's just imperative that boards engage regularly. There are also frequently items that require a board vote, like the approval of fees or new hires that either cannot or should not be postponed. And so having more regular meetings is I think, the best way to do that. Another best practice is to have an executive committee so that you can have quick and nimble decision-making when it's required. And that committee should be empowered to exercise all the powers and authority of the board of directors when the board is not in session, except the power to alter, amend, or appeal the bylaws, or to alter, appeal, or amend any resolution of the board of directors. And it should be made clear that the existence of an executive committee doesn't relieve Board of Regents or any individual director of their responsibilities or their duties. It is just a way that the board can act more nimbly when it's needed. If we think back to COVID-19 and all of the decisions that had to be made at the very beginning of the pandemic, having an executive committee would have been just really valuable to make that quick and nimble decision-making when it was needed. It is also recommended as a best practice to have a limited number of committees. Boards that have too many committees will tend to be operational in their focus rather than strategic, because they will kind of by nature want to do as much as they can, and it will start spreading into operational things. Also, if you have too many boards, individual members will get spread too thin and they won't be able to do their work well, because each individual will have to serve on too many committees. They won't be able to focus well on the committees that are most in their wheelhouse. So it's best to keep that committee number small, especially if you have a small board. And next, those committees that you do have should have defined discrete committee functions. And I will talk about those next. So next slide. So the work of boards should be grounded in the work of its committees. Strong committees increase the productivity of the board, and effective committees are essential to productive board meetings and ultimately successful boards. On the left side of the slide, you see the list of committees recommended by the Association of Governing Boards. And on the right, you see that list modified a little bit for a small system board. I'll start and I'm going to describe what each of these committees does. The Academic Affairs Committee is integral to ensuring boards fulfill their fiduciary oversight duties. The Academic Affairs Committee ensures the institutions or systems' principal purposes of teaching and learning are met. Its purview includes academic quality, strategic academic priorities, pertinent policies, and program adjustments. So before we talked about academic program review, that would be here in this Academic Affairs Committee. Trustees are not expected to have deep understanding of the academic endeavor that faculty or provosts or the vice president for academic affairs have, but committee members do work closely. And I think this is the committee that does work most closely with faculty. The next committee that I'll mention is the Audit Committee or the Audit and Risk Management Committee. The primary charge of the Audit Committee is to provide oversight of the institution's financial practices, its standard of conduct. Compliance is often in this committee as well. It oversees accountability, transparency, enterprise risk management, and effective operations. It ensures that the institution prioritizes accountability and efficient and effective operations. And trustees who are in this committee often will work closely with finance or investment committees to look at the universities or the system's financial health overall. A compensation or personnel committee is the next one on the list. Having a dedicated committee in this area is important because hiring and retaining a president are among the core responsibilities of governing boards. And having a committee that can really dedicate time to hiring a chancellor and presidents is essential in getting those decisions right. As I mentioned, that is one of the most important duties of a board. And of course, committee members also will make decisions that ensure that compensation and benefits are reasonable, compliant with the law, and work with the budget, and make all of those decisions. But of course, they're not making them in an operational sense. They are setting the policy to decide how, what are our bands for compensation? What are they at individual universities? How does this work with the budget? How does this work with our state appropriations? So although it is making those compensation decisions, ultimately, it's doing so in a policy with a policy mechanism rather than, negotiating with individual faculty or administration members. The next committee is Development and Advancement. And Development and Advancement, of course, is going to implement a well-designed, well-executed development program. It's going to focus on fundraising. It provides critical philanthropic leadership to ensure that the programs at individual universities are prudently managed. And the committee members are frequently establishing and reviewing fundraising policies and participate in setting, approving, and monitoring progress of advancement goals. The executive committee, of course, I already talked about it. The purpose of the executive committee, let's see, the Facilities and Real Estate Committee helps shape the physical character of an institution by ensuring that the campus is functional, attractive, and well-maintained. The committee should strive to maintain accountability to the board. It's taking care of the campus, making sure that the facilities work, that they are safe, that they are repaired when they need to be repaired, they are enhanced when they need to be enhanced. The Finance and the Budget Committee, the job of that is to protect and oversee the institution's resources and help fulfill fiduciary responsibilities. The Finance Committee is one of the most important committees in terms of college and university governance. It plays a key role in ensuring the institution's future sustainability. It often is taking the lead on a lot of difficult decisions. The Governance Committee, the job of the Governance Committee is to work on things like bylaws, but it's also the purpose of the committee to orient and educate members of the board and optimize board performance. So if you're doing board self-evaluations, if you're doing trustee onboarding, if you're doing board education, a presentation like this would end up would be spearheaded by the Governance Committee. The Governance Committee helps the board ask and answer the right governance questions. An Investment Committee is also one that's recommended by the Association of Governing Boards. An Investment Committee helps to manage the endowment and other institutional capital assets. It ensures the institution's financial assets are properly managed and invested. It's fulfilling those oversight duties for the management and investments. And so, of course, you all know the importance of the endowment management and to keep a very careful eye on that. And the last committee recommended by the Association of Governing Boards is the Student Affairs Committee. And of course, the purpose of that committee is to serve the students. Their job is to be student focused, to look at what student needs, what our student needs, and how can those needs be better met. My recommendations, especially for a small system board, are to try to cut down on the number of committees, because as your board shrinks, you can do the math about how many committees you would have to serve on if you had a long list of committees. So I recommend, as you can see on the right side of the slide, a smaller number of committees. I recommend combining facilities, real estate, finance, and budget into one committee, because those facilities and those real estate decisions really are financial decisions. Those are capital decisions rather than operational decisions, but they're all budgetary decisions. I also recommend an independent Nevada System of Higher Education Foundation with its own board of directors to handle development and advancement and investment. That is something that many boards or many systems have, is an independent foundation to handle those decisions. And of course, that's how it's done at individual campuses. That the individual campus has a foundation with a foundation board that's making those development, advancement, and investment decisions. And I think that that would go a long way to making sure that this board can concentrate on governance decisions rather than having to spread itself too thin. I also want to talk briefly about agenda setting. Next slide. The agenda of a board meeting is a driving force for everybody's productivity. It helps you move between meeting subjects, and it helps you address everything that you need to address while not dwelling too long on things that may be better addressed by one of your board committees. So the organization of your board meeting agendas plays a big role in how well the meeting and the conversation can flow. So first of all, I recommend having two-day meetings with all of the committees on day one and the full board meeting on day two. And I recommend when you're having that full board meeting that you limit the packet length for the full board meeting. Pack the information into the committees rather than on the full board where it's just too much to digest. The informational reports should mostly be in committee meetings, although not completely in committee meetings. Informational reports from the system are necessary to keep Regents informed, but they should also be as short as is reasonably possible and mostly delivered, as I said, during those committee meetings. Committees are where there is more time and more expertise to digest large quantities of information. And the committee chairs, one of their roles will be to digest that information, figure out that information, and report it out at the full board meeting. So the committees should hear the details, digest the details, and provide a high-level overview for the rest of the board. And these committee reports should be short, hitting only the highlights. As I said earlier, most votes should be included in a consent agenda, especially things like any routine items like things like setting the agenda, prior meeting minutes, approving reviews. Anything that is routine should be voted on in a consent agenda so that you don't have to spend a lot of time going through those individual items. And that leaves the majority of the meeting to discuss strategic direction and other policy issues. A consent agenda is just really helpful because it can consolidate those routine items. A few other tips for the agenda is to include the purpose of the agenda item. Is the item for discussion, for information only, for a vote? And that means that Regents will know the end goal of each agenda item, and it makes those goals easier to achieve. If the item is informational only, then the board can quickly move on after any clarifying questions have been answered and get on to the next agenda item. I think it's also important to set a duration for the board for each agenda item. You don't need me or anyone else to tell you that your time is very valuable. You don't need to spend 30 minutes on every single topic. And so providing a rough estimate will help the board meeting move along so you can stay on time and respect the time of every regent who is sitting in a meeting and respect the time for all the staff members who are in the meeting as well. I've included a sample agenda for a full board meeting where you can see that you do have some reports that are the reports that the full board will hear, a vote on the consent agenda, and then you see those committee reports. And voting for substantive items will occur during the committee reports. So if the finance committee needs you to vote on fees for the next year, for example, they will have heard the full information about fee setting during their committee meeting. They will have voted on it during their committee meeting. And then during their committee report, they'll summarize the recommendations and ask for a vote from the full board. Okay, next slide. I also just want to offer some general advice, and that is to make time to improve the cooperation between the board and administration. You want to solidify those personal relationships. One thing that I've seen governance committees do is they nominate individual members of the board to be liaisons for each university so that you really can solidify the cooperation between administration and the board. You also want to establish relationships with faculty, students, and other stakeholders so that you know the needs of the university and the needs of the various stakeholder groups at the university and at the constituent institutions. It's also important to set really clear norms as a board. You want to have a good onboarding process, invest in ongoing education, and conduct regular evaluations, because the governance of the board will set the tone for the policies of the board and for the university function overall. And I'm happy to talk about any of these during the limited time I have left for Q&A. The last thing I'll do is talk about the resources. Next slide. You can go to our own website. You can go to the website of the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, which has an Institute for Effective Governance, which will supply additional trustee information. It sounds like you all already know about the Association of Governing Boards and the information it provides. And I'll also briefly mention Paideia Times, which is a news quarterly publication aimed specifically at higher education trustees. And university governance is one of the main things that Pi Day at Times focuses on. And with that, I will open it up for any questions that we have time for.
Thank you, Dr. Robertson. We greatly appreciate the time that you spent with us and the presentation that you put together. Are there any regents who have questions about the presentation?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Regent.
Regent Downs, thank you, Chair Brooks. So you mentioned in your sample agenda, what input should the members of the board have on the formation of the agenda versus should that be something purely by the chair, or what is the best practice there?
Well, I think the members of the board, the place where they're going to have the most inputs on the agenda are through their individual committees. Because I think, as I said before, that's where the most substantive work has got to get done if you want to get through the amount of material you're trying to get through. And so I think that board members should have a very large amount of influence over those committees and the committee reports and everything that's coming out of that. But the full board meeting itself, I think it should kind of run like clockwork, where you're hitting through all of the different pieces so that you can get through all of it in a timely manner.
Thank you. And could you just clarify for me? I missed a point there when you described the difference between like an executive committee versus a governance committee.
Okay, so the executive committee is the committee of the chair, the vice chair, the secretary, anybody who holds an executive office on the board. And its exclusive purpose is to be nimble and make decisions when the full board cannot meet. And so if the university says we have to have a decision about fees because the General Assembly has given us a directive and we only have a week to do it, that's when the executive committee makes a decision. It's only for when the full board cannot meet.
Okay, thank you.
Regent Del Carlo.
Thank you. I'd like to know why it's not a best practice based on your research, or maybe it's not a best practice of your center to not have a diversity committee. We're in a very complex world today. It's about ready to blow up, and personal relationships and understanding of each other's identities and cultures is extremely important. So why wouldn't we have a diversity committee? Thank you.
I would say first and foremost that is part of student affairs or part of personnel. I think that if you look at the list of committees, the committees are structured based on the activities of the board rather than by subject matter. And so the work of doing the work that you might put in a diversity committee, I would say should really best be divided through a personnel committee, a student affairs committee, and maybe an academic affairs committee rather than putting it all in one place. The list does come directly from the Association of Governing Boards, though.
Are there regents who have other questions? Regent Breger.
Not really a question. I guess I would just like to say these are suggestions. We all are diverse, and I think when we make our committees or agenda items, should be because it comes from all of us. And I think that would be important. I think the presentation was fine. I didn't think it was slanted one way or another. It was very direct, and we can take from it what we want and what we don't want. But I think committees are pretty interesting as to what's happening on our campuses and in our state.
Are there any other comments or questions? I don't see any. Thank you again, Dr. Robinson. We greatly appreciate your time and the amount of energy you put into putting this presentation together. And certainly hoping that as a board, we'll take some of the tools that you've provided us that we think will best suit our needs and just have consideration for other processes in terms of getting things done effectively. So again, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Chair Brooks. And any of you are welcome to reach out if you think of additional questions after I leave the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you again. We're going to take a 5-minute administrative break, and then we'll move right into agenda item number 3. But we're going to move on to
Carrie,
agenda item number 3.
I have a question first.
What's that, Regent? Okay.
I have a question before we go on, please. Because I didn't feel like I really got a good answer before, and I guess I was a little bit confused with the public comment. But so my question was, did you singularly, as the chair, pick that group to do the presentation? And the answer is either yes or no. And if the answer is no, then who did you consult with? That's all I wanted to know.
I'm not sure what we get out of
I just want to know the answer. I think we can have the
tone,
answer.
though, right? Of conversations
Not the tone,
that we
I'm
have.
asking you. Did you
I'm going to
singularly
disagree.
pick them?
And so
Did
I
you
did.
singularly pick them?
Are we going to talk over one another?
Yeah, sure.
I'll wait till you're finished then.
Go ahead.
I looked at this group that was a suggestion by someone else to support the board with the differences between management and governance. And from my perspective, the board often bleeds one into the other. And I really do not see why there would be more conversation about who is providing us information than being able to let the information sink in to find out what part of the information that we're getting can we actually use to support best practices for this board. When I looked at the reference and had several conversations with folks from this group, particularly with Dr. Robertson, while there may be differences of how the institution as a whole moves policy regarding governance and management and those differences, I felt they were pretty aligned with the way the board can move. And so I thought, let me move this one forward. So the process of choosing the James Martin Group, that was me. The conversations of having it on the agenda were collaborative, just like all of our agenda items are in terms of how some of this gets done. And so I had conversations with our vice chair, our chancellor, our chief of staff, and at the end of the day, we recognized that as long as Dr. Robertson is staying within where we could use some support, and because this was being offered to us at zero cost, and because this was set up as a workshop, which provided the ability for Regents to either be part of this conversation or not be part of this conversation, that as a Regent, they could determine what they wanted to do, this moved forward. I'm frankly, having heard the presentation, I'm a little surprised that there is still some tension based on the information that was provided to us. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Apologize, Mr. Wixom. I got caught up with just a little bit of side conversation there with Regent Del Carlo. So now we'll move on to agenda item number 3, which is the overview of the Nevada open meeting law and how it applies to NSHE policies or the chancellor and presidential searches. And just for clarification, I suggested this agenda item. And the reason that I suggested this agenda item is because we're in the process of building out a committee to have these type of conversations. And in support of the members of that committee, whoever they may be, I thought it was imperative that if we can help that committee with speeding up conversations, we should get some direction from somebody who has spent a considerable amount of time, not only as a regent, but somebody who's in the system, who could provide information to us based on the vast amount of experience that they have. With that, I will ask Special Counsel Michael Wixom to begin agenda item number 3 in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. It's good to be with you. Good afternoon. As the board chair indicated, the purpose of this discussion is to provide a general overview of the chancellor search process in light of the Nevada open meeting law requirements. You'll find that This process will largely mirror the process for the presidential searches. And so it's a healthful discussion, especially as you begin the committee process, to take a look at the chancellor's search process in light of the Nevada open meeting law. A number of years ago, when I was chair, I'd gone to an event actually at the Thomas and Mack Center, and somebody had said, I want you to meet this person. You would really enjoy meeting them. And I said, great. So they introduced themselves as former member of the board. This person had been on the board probably 2 decades before then. And we had some pleasant conversation. And he finally said, how in the world do you get anything done? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, with the open meeting law, we never had to deal with any of that. I said, well, how did you do things? Well, they said, we got on the phone and we worked out everything before the meeting. And so we get to the meeting and we were done by noon and we go to lunch. It was great. I don't know how you get anything done. And so in a sense, that process was expeditious for him. But the Nevada open meeting law, the purpose is to provide the public with the opportunity to understand the operations and the system and how things work. It presents some challenges, certainly, but it does, I think, present some opportunities as well. The materials that you have in front of you and that were provided as part of the board agenda are provided as a resource for you. As I spoke with General Counsel Martinez and as we discussed the idea, we thought it would be helpful for you to have the materials in one easily accessible format. We're going to go through a general highlight of those materials as part of the agenda item that I have today. And then I'm going to talk about some areas where I think they could be clarified, some possible policy changes that you may want to consider as you begin the process of looking at this. At the beginning, we thought it would be helpful that you can understand the process itself. You need to understand that the items that we're going to go through really don't appear in this order in the board handbook. We've pulled them out of order and they're presented in an order that we generally follow, but you won't find them in this order in the handbook. You have to pull them out. I'm going to mention that that's one point that you may want to consider clarifying, is providing one specific place in the handbook where you can go through a detailed list of the procedures. But this is a general outline. If when you have a vacancy for a chancellor, the first job that the board has to do is make the decision about whether or not you're going to conduct a national, regional, in-state, or other search for a permanent chancellor, and whether the committee can be aided in that area by a search consultant. And that's an important point to begin. I need to mention at the outset is an interesting historical note that shortly after World War II, Dwight Eisenhower was named president of Columbia University. And he had no graduate degrees. He had gone to West Point, but his only experience was that he had been a 5-star general. And Columbia thought that was really swell, and they would like that. But they had to suspend their procedures. And so at the beginning of their process, they said, we want Dwight Eisenhower as a president of Columbia University. But they could do that at the beginning. So if Dwight were here and you wanted him, you could suspend board policy and begin the process that way. But that's a decision that you make at the outset. If the board determines to use a search consultant, the search consultant shall be selected by the chancellor, the chiefs of staff, and special counsel to the Board of Regents and the chief general counsel. Now, this is an important point. I'll talk about this a little later. I had a long conversation with the Attorney General's office about the open meeting law issues that we're going to discuss today to make sure that we align in our perspective, and we do. This is an important point. If the board chose the search consultant or the board chair chose the search consultant, then the search consultant would be subject to the Nevada open meeting law. That's why it's structured the way it is. And that's why the search consultant is hired independently of the board so that the search consultant is not subject to the open meeting law. That does not mean, and it's something that we can talk about in a few minutes, that the board can't have input on the qualifications for the search consultant. If you want to determine the type of search consultant or the nature, the qualifications, or the experience of the search consultant, you can do that. But if you choose a consultant, then under the Nevada open meeting law, that becomes a subcommittee of the board and the search consultant, and everything the consultant does would be subject to the Nevada open meeting law. The board chair then appoints an ad hoc Regents Chancellor Search Committee composed of 4 to 6 members. Obviously, 4 and 6 are difficult numbers because then you can end up with a tie vote. And I've been part of that experience before, and it really isn't any fun at all. So that's the decision that you have to make. Ideally, probably the best practice would be to choose 5 so that you can have a final decision through that process. Now, their charge would be to recruit and recommend a nominee or nominees for the appointment to the position. Now, that's where it gets a little problematic, and we'll talk about that. The chair of the board, in consultation with the vice chair, appoints the chair of the Regents Chancellor Committee. That's within the bylaws. Before it makes a recommendation or recommendations to the board, the committee consult with an advisory committee described in the code section. Now, 2 points. The code itself and the bylaws really don't say a lot about what the advisory committee does. In practice, the advisory committee has gotten together, and I've been involved in a number of the church, I think 15 searches, but in practice, the advisory committee will meet together at its first meeting with the search committee and say, this is the type of individual we want for this position, whether it's a chancellor or a president, and they look at the person and they look at the qualification. If they want a terminal degree, for example, if the type of experience they have, they get a feel for what happens, and then they take that input. But that's not codified within the board at this time. That's just been a practice that we've used. The board office provides staff assistance to the board chancellor committee. Now, it's important, as a side note, that the board chair not select who becomes part of that process. The board can't say, I want you, Carrie, or I want you, Jim, or I want you, Winter, to be part of this process. Because once again, what happens if the board chair chooses that person? They become a subcommittee of the board. So that has to be delegated. We talked about delegation earlier, to the chancellor or the present chancellor or whoever's acting as chancellor at the time. The budget is established by the chair of the Board of Regents in consultation with the chief of staff and special counsel. Now, I should say that the budget is significant because the budget's going to establish how much you can pay for the search consultant. And the quality of the search consultant will in large measure be determined by what you pay the search consultant. And so you need to understand the parameters within which you operate. So you need to get information about what that kind of a search consultant would cost. The chair of the committee shall, in accordance with the direction of the committee, either directly or in consultation with the search consultant, if one is hired, be responsible for the initial screening process to determine candidates for consideration by the committee. Now, I need to point out, and this is something I discussed at length with the Attorney General's office when I spoke with them. One member of the board can do the review. One member of the board can go through and make the evaluation. Ideally, that member would use the information that they had from the initial meeting of the search committee and the advisory committee saying, these are the kinds of people we're looking for. You can also appoint one member of the board to hire that person. That is not something I would advise, but technically you can. You can also hire a third party to hire the person. But once again, that would seem to be largely inconsistent with the objectives of the board to participate in that process. But you can technically do that. However, once again, if the board chair or the committee chair involves multiple people, that's when you have to invoke the open meeting law. Now, in terms of the screening process, ideally the screening process would work in a way so that after you go through the screening process, first you have to determine how many people do you want to come back to interview. I've interviewed up to 10 people in a search process. That was an aggressive search. And I think in retrospect, I'm not sure how effective it was for us to interview 10 people in a day. Realistically, that's a bunch of people and that's a lot of information. My experience has been that you're probably looking for a smaller group, maybe 3 to 5, because it's easier to process the information. But that means that you're going to have to provide some guidance to the board, the chair of the subcommittee, and so that the screening process is such that you get the types of people you're looking for. The Regents, the Chancellor Search Committee shall meet at the call of the chair of the committee to discuss the qualifications of the applicants recommended after the initial screening, and that's where you would go through the interview process. I can say that that may be one area that you want to consider clarifying board policy, because it doesn't talk about interviews. It doesn't talk about the number of candidates. It doesn't talk about that process. It just talks about this general notion of how to proceed after the initial screening. There aren't any specifics in that regard. Now, they will interview and evaluate the candidates and thereafter select its nominee or the nominees for appointment to the position. If the board determines not to appoint the nominee, then you start the process over, which you certainly can. In common parlance, you would call that a failed search, and you would start the search process over again. Now, I've gone through quite a bit of information. I want to stop for just a minute. Do any of you have any questions? Are there any issues you'd like to discuss at this point in time?
Regent Del Carlo.
You got my name right. Thank you.
Love to hear from you. Thank you.
Oh, that was snarky. I didn't understand the part you said that you could hire somebody, but you don't recommend it. Could you go over that again? I didn't
Well,
get that.
you can hire a third party to hire. You can delegate, and that's the point I confirmed with the Attorney General's office. You can go say, you can as a board decide this is the type of person that we want, and then hire somebody to go hire that person. That's permissible under the open meeting law. But the question is that what you want to do? So you can delegate all of this. You can delegate, you can say, I want somebody, this is the kind of person I want, go find this person and bring them back.
Are you aware of the board ever having done that?
No.
This is new information to me. That's why I'm asking.
No, I'm not aware of that, because I think it would be largely inconsistent with the spirit of the board policies, because the spirit of the board policies certainly imply that the regents are part of that process. You can technically do it if you would like. You can hire somebody to bring you back candidates. You don't have to go through any of this. Under the open meeting law, you can just say, I hire you, search consultant, to go bring us back 3 people. You can do that too, but I don't advise that because I think that would largely be inconsistent with the board policies, at least the spirit of what the board wants to do. Because the sense of the board policy, as I read it, is that the board wants to have input in the interview process, and the board wants to have input in the selection of the nominees. And the way the board has chosen to do that is to designate the chair of the search committee to go through the initial screening process. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
One question that I need to go back to, this is an area that may, item 6, as I was going through the policies, I'm trying to identify areas that would be the subject of for some clarification for the committee. I don't know what oversee means in that context. What does that mean? I mean, I'm looking at that going, I don't know. I mean, I have no idea what it means. And ambiguity is ripe for problems. And maybe that's one area you may want to consider clarifying, is I don't know what it means to oversee the details of the search without violating the open meeting law.
You know what, Special Counsel, we have a couple of other questions.
Please,
since
go
you
ahead.
invited a couple of regents to ask questions. Regent Goodman? Okay, sorry. Saw you in the queue. Regent Arascata, Vice Chair Arascata.
Thank you, Regent Brooks. On the previous page right there, Mr. Wixom, you discussed the type of search that you'd like to have, in-state, out-of-state.
That would be
at the
item,
onset of
pardon
the
me, there we go, I'm sorry, item 1 there. Regent Arascata, is that what you're talking about?
Yes, it is. Thank you very much. About in-state or out-of-state. So at the previous search, it was going to be in-state. Then it was voiced upon by numerous veterans and voted by numerous regents and voted upon to do out-of-state, to do a national search. And then at the last minute, during the search consultants, with myself as chair, we followed all the essential components and essential qualities. We followed all of the surveys to the T. And at the last minute, those goalposts were changed, and it was requested from a national search to shrink it down to a search of Nevada only. Is that some way, could that have been overridden? Could that have just been unobserved and maintained the previous candidates? Or follow through with a candidate that was spoken of during that time?
Thank you, Regent Arascata, for the question. I need to first observe, while I observed that I was aware of the search process, I was not part of the process. So I don't know the details itself about how the parameters were set. And so it isn't really appropriate, I think, for me to judge or to critique that process because I wasn't part of it. I can say that from the board policy, what should happen is if the board decides on a national search, then it's a national search. If the board changes the parameters of the search, then the board needs to change the parameters of the search. And so if it's a broad search and they say, no, we don't want to do a broad search, then the parameters of the search need to be changed, and that would be a decision of the board. And so you can start with a national and go to a regional or an in-state, and you can start with an in-state or go to the national, but ultimately that's a decision of the board. Does that answer your question?
It does on that side. What about one of the particular components of the essential quality or qualifications of the position when throughout the entire process, it was followed throughout the entire process. And then at the last minute, the requirements were changed, as in from a recommended education or recommended experience or recommended time at an R1 institute, which was never spoken about throughout the entire 4 months. Can the goalpost be moved so much that essentially it is going to be a failed search at the last minute?
You know, Regent Arascata, I'm trying to be careful because I don't want to be viewed as the open meeting law policeman, but in sense that's beyond really the scope of our agendized item. If you're going to discuss a particular search and evaluate a search, then that should be agendized on the meeting, and you can discuss as a board what did work and what didn't work. And that can be a productive and meaningful conversation. This particular agenda item has not been agendized in that way, and so I really can't comment. I can comment in general and make a couple of observations. One of the key components, and when I was involved in searches, the advisory committee was so helpful to me. And I found, and we had this discussion on a number of searches, especially presidential searches, whether to focus on somebody within the system, for example, or somebody outside the system, or somebody nationally. Sometimes the advisory committee and the initial charge to the search consultant can be phrased in such a way that you can look for somebody with a certain set of qualifications. You can also look for alternatives. You can say, we would like this kind of a person, and we want this kind of a person with this kind of a background. If we can't find this kind of a person with this kind of a background or qualifications, then you can have alternatives. And so you don't have to necessarily force yourself into one particular avenue as you're giving parameters to the committee chair or to the search consultant, so that the search consultant can have the flexibility to say, this person is not from Nevada or not from our region, but this person's qualifications are so closely aligned to the experiences that you have in the state that we think that this person is someone you want to consider. But a lot of that comes from the charge that's given by the advisory committee and the board, and that's one of the reasons I was going to suggest that you may want to look closely at the role of the advisory committee and the initial charge that's given to the consultant in terms of the qualifications, because that can be an invaluable process, and you can allow yourself the flexibility to bring back persons that more closely aligned with your objective. I hope that's helpful in that regard. But that may be one area to consider.
It does. Mr. Wixom, can the chair of the search committee and or the search committee itself change the criteria ongoing throughout the search process?
Let me make, well, a couple of observations. They can do so so long as it's within the original charge of the board. The board, if the original charge of the board to the committee is go find us a chancellor, we would dress that language up, obviously. But if the charge is go find us a chancellor that we really like and who would be marvelously successful, however we dress up that language, if that's the charge and that's broad enough, then, and actually I've seen this happen, and we had this happen, where on several searches that I was involved in, we had the initial guidance from the advisory committee, and we sent the board, the subcommittee chair, the search committee chair, and the search consultant out to find this person, and they couldn't find anybody that really worked. And they said, we don't feel good about this. So we came back, and as a subcommittee, we changed the scope. We said, this isn't working, so we need to narrow this and think about it differently. But the search committee itself can change the parameters of the search, but they would have to do so as a search committee. Does that answer your question, Regent Arascata?
It does, and I just want to clarify, just the search committee can do that, or does the entire board need to have their input to change it also?
Again, it would be a subject of what the original board charge was. If the original board charge was specific, and you can make it specific, if the original charge from the board is we want a person with this qualification and this qualification, and they have a long list of qualifications, and they give that charge to the search committee, then the search committee is bound by the board, and you'd have to go back to the board. If the charge from the board is we really want a swell person, that would be great, and it's broad in that regard, then the subcommittee, the search committee itself has parameters to change the goalpost, in your words, or parlance. They can change the parameters of the search. So the search committee itself can do that and I've seen it happen 2 or 3 times. They'll come back and say, this just isn't working. We need to go back again, and you go back again. But you would give, then the search committee would change the parameters and give those parameters to the board chair and to the search consultant. Is that responsive, Regent Arascata?
Yes, very much so. Thank you, Mr. Wixom.
Thank you. Chair Brooks, were there any other questions that I've overlooked?
I don't see anything in our queue. Thank you for asking.
Let me move on. That's the general charge of the committee, and that's the general charge of the process. And again, if you reach the end of the process, you can't start over again. Now, I will say, we're going to talk briefly about the open meeting law. Your process complies with the Nevada open meeting law. I mean, there is nothing about your process, and again, I've confirmed that with the Attorney General's office. There's nothing about your process that's inconsistent with the open meeting law. That does not mean that there aren't parts of your process that you may want to consider clarifying, and I've identified some of those areas, and that could make your life easier and could make the process more responsive to what you need to do. And I've talked about those points. And if I were to prioritize how I would view the process, having been through it, I would focus on the advisory committee and the role of the advisory committee and how you interact with the advisory committee. I think that area could be rich for some really positive input on how you can feel better about this process and how the community is engaged in the process. Because it's really not helpful if the community isn't engaged in the process. Just a brief primer on the Nevada open meeting law. If a public body participates in any part of the selection process, then everything has to be part of the selection process. So as I said earlier, that means you have to be really careful about having the search consultant, for example, appointed not by the board, but by, you can establish parameters for what kind of search consultant you want, but that selection needs to be made by someone other than the board, or you run into a problem. A public body means a subcommittee or a working group. That means, as I said earlier, and it can be people on or off the board. So if the board chair were to pull staff in, and the board chair says, I want you, or I want you, or I want you, then you're part of the open meeting law, and you have to comply with the open meeting law. 4 to 6 members, again, I can't reiterate enough, the search committee itself is a public body. There isn't any question about that. There's no way around it. There's no wiggle room. It is a public body, and you're required to be subject to the Nevada open meeting law. Now, the initial screening process is not subject to the open meeting law because it only includes a single regent and not others. I'd actually made this suggestion to Regent Downs when we were having a private conversation. I was thinking, maybe we could do this too, but that was my mistake, because when I went back through and double checked, and I confirmed this again, any single regent is not subject to the open meeting law. 2 or more are subject to the open meeting law. And we've talked about that. And we've talked about the reason why you only have 1 person as part of the screening process. Now, I've talked about a lot of information, and I'm sorry, I see a SCS logo. What did I break? I broke something. Anyway, I'm going to go back again to the open meeting law and say, do you have any questions in that regard? Can I be helpful in any way there? Do you have any follow-up questions that I could be helpful with?
We do have one question from our Chief of Staff, Carrie
Please.
Nikolajewski.
Thank you. Once the board makes the decision on the type of search, national, regional, in-state, other, would it be appropriate to bring the RFP before the search committee as a way to set the parameters for what type of consultant we're looking at? And would that be appropriate, and could the committee do that?
Yes. You can have the parameters that you want for a search consultant. You certainly can. You just can't name the search consultant, and you shouldn't include the names of the potential search consultants. You want to keep a distance in that regard. But you can certainly establish the parameters. Now, I need to issue one warning in that regard, and it comes to mind because when we're talking about the parameters of the search consultant, when you bring, one suggestion has been made that we could bring folks back, and while we wouldn't include their names, we would include their qualifications so that we would understand the kind of persons we're looking at. The problem with that is that whether it's a chancellor or a president, and because it's a public meeting, search consultants all over the country are scouring your materials. And they're looking for people who match up. And if they see somebody who's really close on that person, they're going to say, well, that person looks familiar, so they'll just call them up and say, so were you part of that search? Because I'm seeing it says this, and it says this, and it says this. And so it puts them in a really difficult position. And so you have to be really careful if you're screening people, if you bring them back and say, well, we don't use their name, but we include all of their qualifications. Even if you don't include the institutions, you're going to inadvertently identify them. And generally speaking, they want to be careful so that they don't run into trouble with their present position. So, any other questions?
There aren't any other questions that I can see from any regent, frankly. And we certainly appreciate the information that you've provided. And just so that regents are aware, I have asked Special Counsel Michael Wixom to be part of whatever committee will be assembled to support a chancellor search, because the idea is to assemble a committee who can really start diving through what are some of the clarifications or revisions that could be made within how the process gets done with somebody who can provide legal, ML, and significant experience for the way that this actually works. So it's designed really to support this committee and designed to allow the committee to move at a quicker process of getting to a place where they can bring something to the full board so that we can then begin the process of the actual chancellor search. Thank you again for your time and your dedication to this particular, the committee that we're going to have to assemble to get moving forward.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move right into agenda item number 4, new business. Are there any suggested items of new business? I don't see any new business items. We'll go into public comments. Is there any public comment at GBC?
There is no public comment at GBC.
Thank you. Is there any public comment at the system office in Reno?
There is not.
Thank you. We'll go to public comment here in Las Vegas.
Hello, Regents. Molly Apple, APPEL, for the record, Nevada State Faculty Senate Chair. I truly take your statement about listening deeply to heart, Regent Goodman, and your concerns as well, Chair Brooks. My mother was a social worker for almost 40 years, and I tried to learn as much as I could about listening from her. One of the things I tried to learn is that listening is not just about hearing with our ears. It means meeting people fully where they are, being present with the actions and experiences they bring to a space. How do we make sense of the place of people's politics in an environment of learning? As a professor of the humanities, I have the privilege of grappling with this question every day. And what I offer to you is this. All people, all forms of knowledge even, are political. And I don't say that as a condemnation. I say this as an essential human condition. All of us bring the sum of our actions, knowledge, and experience to all of the work that we do. And the goal in effective, honest dialogue is not to eliminate our biases. That's like trying to eliminate our humanness. Rather, the goal is to clearly situate our positionality when we come to the table. Not to ignore our prior knowledge and experience, but to take it seriously, recognize it, and grapple with it in our dialogues, not unlike the holistic process of admissions we were discussing earlier. Educators and learners here bring these concerns about the Martin Center not maliciously, not to censor or seal off higher ed as an echo chamber, but out of a deep love, passion, and dedication to our craft and the protection of intergenerational knowledge. I am so proud to see a group of leaders who seek to improve and learn in their craft. And I'm most proud of my leaders when they operate out of a place of trust in those they govern. Thank you for your time today.
Don't touch it. Dr. Bill Robinson, UNLV Faculty Senate Chair, you know what I'm about to say because I've said this to you so many times, but you're gonna have to put up with me for another 9 months. 3 faculty Senate chairs ago at UNLV, that Senate chair is a nationally recognized expert on governing boards in higher education, has been used repeatedly across the country by other governing boards to help them. And I would say the same thing, even if we brought in had brought in people from the associations we belong to. We also used to have, and I don't know if he's still here, but a nationally recognized expert who works with corporate boards. And that would have been an interesting other voice to have. And I just wish the board, when they thought about a consultant, the first thing they'd think about is who do we have who actually works for us? And I just got to keep saying that. And the other thing is, you know, that even, and I support fully Regent Del Carlo's push for a governance committee, and I know that's on your next December 1st agenda, and I hope that that just slides right through. But again, I still think you just need to have a meeting where you sit around and talk, right? That's a nice come to Jesus meeting. How do agendas get set? How do meeting dates get set? When do materials need to come to us? What format do the materials need to come in? There's all kinds of things that I think are on your agendas that you don't need to have on your agendas. And yet there are things where you need to spend an hour discussing something and you never have the time. Regent Carvalho has talked multiple times about trying to get our mission creep to be less creepier and our differentiation to be differentiated. And that's an hour, 2-hour discussion with the president and the board. And when just one last thing, because I'm about to run out of time. I think that you should do the opposite of some of what was said in that. Your committee meetings, you have 11 and 12 and 13 regents at your committee meetings. That makes them not committees. Maybe the board needs to strip away a lot of what you're talking about and just have a board meeting where you talk about things. And I just, and again, you know, I'm more than, I just want you guys to talk about all this important stuff and really talk about it.
Thank you. SES, do we have any public comment on the phone?
There's none at this time.
Thanks for letting me know. This meeting's now adjourned. Thank you.